This is Audible.
Upfront Books presents Early Retirement Extreme, a philosophical and practical guide to financial independence, written by Jacob Lund Fisker and narrated by Douglas Martin. With your purchase of this audiobook, you've received a downloadable PDF containing several key figures and equations discussed in Chapter 7. This document will enhance your understanding of the book's key concepts and is available at earlyretirementextreme.com/ERE-book or also at archive.org/details/ERE-book-PDF, all lowercase. About the book. I think of this book first and foremost as a philosophy book about strategy. Like most philosophical books, it's voluminous compared to its content, because much of it is dedicated to defining and redefining underlying concepts and fundamentals, trying to find the words to describe something that isn't automatically implied by the usual understanding of the words used. The lack of concrete specifics is intentional, because they won't pertain to very many people. The approach is deliberately open-ended, to make the concepts applicable to as many different situations as possible. This may also mean that the concepts, which aim to create conciliant and resilient structures, are applicable to other kinds of organizing, like policymaking or business management. This book isn't a how-to manual to a specific lifestyle, but a how-to manual for how-to manuals. The intention is for each person to create his own strategy. In this sense, this book isn't a travel journal, nor is it a set of map directions. It's a book that teaches you to become a navigator. I used the principles in this book to reduce my expenses to a quarter of the average person and become financially independent in 5 years. While my story may be entertaining or inspiring, it may not be directly useful towards reaching a similar goal. Similarly, while initially motivating due to their actionable form, a set of map directions would fail the first time one reaches a crossroads not on the map. This would end the journey if the pilot has no navigational skills. I have therefore written the book as a textbook. Learning how to become financially independent requires study. This requires effort and is not easy. If it was truly easy, everybody would be doing it. But it's no more difficult than getting a college education or becoming a skilled tradesman in your respective field. What I'll describe here is another kind of life, the life of an independently wealthy and widely skilled person, a modern Renaissance man. A note about the difficulty level. This isn't a book for beginners. It's not a book one can listen to and proceed to become financially independent, just as reading a textbook about physics won't turn a person into a physicist. This only happens when the concepts are constantly applied and one starts thinking like a physicist. Things are similar for a person pursuing financial independence. This is a book which I think can be consumed at several different levels. The reason for different levels is that people change as they learn. Depending on where you are, the book will relate to you in different ways. This is good, because those who evolve will become different people, eventually. What used to seem like a sacrifice will seem natural, and what used to seem natural will come to be seen as a sacrifice. What used to be a collection of techniques will become a general principle. What used to feel challenging will now feel easy. A note about getting started. You don't need to learn everything before getting started. After all, you can drive a car without knowing how the engine works. In fact, you can drive several different kinds of cars. This is because most cars handle the same. However, to stay with the analogy, the same car can be driven with very different gas mileages. It may be listed as 33 miles per gallon, but good technique can double that number, and poor technique can cut it in half. A trivial technique is to reduce speed by 5 miles per hour, which will simply bring most drivers back to the speed limit. Similarly, if living is thought of as driving a particular kind of vehicle, there are techniques in this book which can be applied without understanding exactly why they work. Understanding why they work will subsequently allow one to tweak and improve them. A note about references. This is not an academic work. I have resisted the temptation to follow the medievally inspired academic tradition of citing old books to make statements based on authority. I find that showing the derivation from basic principles is more useful for application. A note about geography. While this book is somewhat U.S.-centric in its examples, the methods should work in any developed country with a market economy. Retirement plans have different names from country to country, but every country offers very similar plans to its citizens. In some countries, healthcare is paid through taxes, and in other countries it's paid out of pocket. In any case, the prices for goods and services are similar in developed countries, so the strategies in this book will work even if technical details differ. A note about originality. Feynman once remarked that the best way to find new insights into a problem was to step out of the box, ignore previous publications, and come to your own conclusions. With such an approach, it often happens that a concept which is initially considered to be novel turns out to have been discovered already. In fact, many of the ideas in this book go back decades and even centuries. To give an example, when I was a teenager, I wasted a lot of my time playing computer games. One genre I particularly enjoyed was real-time strategy. Games like Doom, Warcraft 1 and 2, and Command & Conquer. In these games, you build up forces comprised of individual units, such as tanks and warriors. When these units fight, each fights at full strength until it's destroyed or killed. Since the rate of attrition depends on the number of weapons firing or striking, the optimal strategy in a battle is therefore for all your units to attack a single individual enemy at a time, to reduce the number of enemies firing or striking as fast as possible. A great many players have independently discovered this strategy, called Lanchester's square law, without being aware that it had actually already been discovered by Frederick W. Lanchester during World War I. So it is with many observations about life in general. This, incidentally, is why reading the classics is very worthwhile. Concepts get discovered, forgotten, and then rediscovered, either independently or by reading old books. Like Lanchester's law, I discovered many of the concepts in this book only to find out later that someone else had already discovered and named the concept before me. Further reading revealed that yet others had written about the concept before them, and so on. For example, I found that the quadrants in Chapter 3 are similar to the Cash Flow Quadrant book by Robert Kiyosaki, even as they were inspired by the types described in Maccabee's earlier book, The Gamesman, and the arrangement itself, the dimensions, comes from Charles Perrow's normal accident theory. Analogously, I'm sure that Lanchester wasn't the first person to think about how to most effectively direct the fire of siege trebuchets. A note about completeness. There's always the temptation to make a book complete. However, a line must be drawn lest the book grow to the size of a minor encyclopedia. After all, the quantity of knowledge that must be mastered is not trivial, and thus I can't describe everything. However, I hope I've used enough relevant keywords to allow a quick search on the internet for more information. In all cases, I've striven to use standard words rather than jargon. Chapter 1. A Different Frame of Mind. When I grew up, I dutifully went to school and did my homework. For the most part, schooling was about sitting still for 45 minutes while doing simple tasks that the teacher handed out. I was very good at sitting still, and thus I was a good student. I learned how to add, multiply, divide, and subtract. I learned how to punctuate a sentence and how to spell. I learned something about chemistry. Then I learned something about physics and geology. At some point, the teacher introduced tests and grades. Test-taking became the primary objective, learning secondary. We had the option to quickly forget what we had spent the past year learning after the test was done. In other words, we were being taught to be flexible. Later, there were job fairs and educational fairs telling us how to write resumes and how to interview so we could get jobs. Yet, I never learned why the world worked the way it did. And in retrospect, I think nobody ever even asked the question. Everybody always only focused on the what and where. No questions asked. But as I started my career as a research assistant in physics, I started getting interested in all the whys of life. As I studied and thought about various fundamental questions such as, why do we use money instead of promises or favors? Why do we live in houses and not boats or cars? Why are there usually 2 to 4 people in a home and not 10 to 20? Why do we move away from home? Why do we work until we're 65? All while getting assaulted with well-intended encouragements that I should make sure to open a retirement account before I was 30 and put 15% of net income into it, that I should buy a house, that married homeowners were more prosperous and therefore I better get married too, that I should buy a new car, that people would like me more if I wore a particular kind of brand clothing, and that I would enjoy a beverage more if it came from a certain kind of bottle. I was beginning to feel that something was wrong. Why is the emperor not wearing any clothes? I started getting an uneasy feeling that something about the world was not quite right. Nobody explained the why. Sure, they could explain how I should first purchase a starter home so I could upgrade later. But nobody could or would explain why I should buy a house in the first place. Nobody could or would explain why I should have a career, only that career development was important. There are a few allegories that explain this progression in thinking. The oldest is Plato's cave, or for modern movie watchers, The Matrix has a similar premise. In Plato's cave, prisoners have been arranged in a row in a dark cave since childhood. They're chained so that they can't move their bodies, and their heads are restrained too so they can only face forward towards a wall. They can hear and speak, but they can't see each other, nor can they see themselves. Behind them is a fire. The fire's light shows the shadows of the prisoners on the wall. Between the prisoners and the fire, there are people and animals acting out a realistic play, casting shadows on the wall as well. The prisoners see only the shadows, but they hear all the sounds. Naturally, they think the world is composed of shadows on the wall, and that they themselves are shadows on the wall. The shadows talk to each other and interact, and it all makes sense to the prisoners, who think that all the shadows on the wall are like themselves. The prisoners even know each other through the shadows they see and the voices they hear, and they gain status by their ability to recognize other shadows and predict what they'll do. Now imagine that one of the prisoners is released. His shackles fall to the ground, and he can turn his head. He sees the other prisoners sitting in a row chained to the ground, and he's horrified. He also sees the actors and animals between the prisoners and the fire. He sees the cave opening and ventures out. He is blinded by the light, but finally sees the big picture. All his life, he has been sitting in a cave, chained to the ground, believing that the wall was it. Now he has realized that the action on the wall is guided mainly by a few actors, with the prisoners providing commentary. Now he sees the opportunities in the real world. He feels duty-bound to go back and inform the prisoners of the situation and try to release them. First, he tries to explain the existence of the puppet masters to the prisoners, but the masters are unlikely to corroborate his story since they derive much personal benefit from the current way of the world. Then he tries to explain how the system is arranged with the prisoners and the cave. Tragically, he finds the prisoners more resistant than he expected. Most don't believe him, and why should they? Having adjusted to the light outside, he can't see the shadows as clearly as they can. What a dimwit. Taking off the chains requires too much effort, so most of them remain seated. These are people who are very good and successful at identifying, naming, and dealing with shadows, and so they may not want to leave. There are also those who do feel the need to leave. Leaving is not easy. It requires much learning and a reorientation of one's values from equating success with identifying shadows to equating success with moving around in the real world. In real life, the prisoners of Plato's cave are those who are prisoners or slaves to their wages and their culture. A wage slave is a wage earner who is entirely dependent on their wages. While the wage slave is free to leave the current job, he isn't free to leave the job market altogether, and he can likely not imagine the possibility of doing so. He is still entirely focused on the wall. The wall shows other people not as who they are, but as what they own. There goes a man in his new sports car. What is not seen is that the car is bought on credit and that the man is stressed because he is having trouble making the payments. Wage slaves have jobs where they can go and spend their most productive hours writing high-powered memos so they can be more productive, while other people spend their time ignoring memos so they can be more productive too. This is how it goes. In fact, one of the great inventions of the 20th century, the personal computer, has made it possible to write even more memos and notices. This is great because it allows people to do their job while looking busier than ever. Looking busy is important because in this culture business is a virtue, just as being in debt is a virtue. And the most virtuous are those with the highest credit scores. They're better at being in debt compared to other people. This endless working and paying is called making a living. Yet people are so busy making a living that they have no time for living. A wage slave is a person who is not only economically bound by mortgages, loans, and other obligations, but also mentally bound by an inability to perceive that there are other options available, like the prisoners in Plato's cave. Their chains are not physical like those of 150 years ago, though they still are in some parts of the world. The chains are mental, which in some sense makes them worse, because it turns the prisoners into their own prison wardens. Like the slaves in Plato's cave, the only commonly accepted way for one of them to leave is to win the prison game, which means accumulating at least $1 million to retire, although thanks to government-induced inflation of the money supply, this is a growing number. $1 million now is considered insufficient by a growing number of people, even though most people will never accumulate such a sum. There is disenchanted grumble about the system or the man. The analogy of the system is the people walking around behind the chained slaves, keeping them going. However, it's mainly the slaves themselves who keep themselves going. We don't realize that we maintain this system by lack of imagination and questioning. Like birds, which never seem to have a flight plan, yet always seem to fly together in a swarming flock, we don't question. We obediently pick whatever options are handed to us, often choosing based on what our neighbors have chosen. We make the best of the shadows on the wall, but we do not question the wall. The best prison is the one with invisible bars. Perhaps one reason for this complacency is the large quantity of material goods available to the chain gang. Material goods are often used as compensation. Frequently, when someone is depressed, the advice is, go out and spend some money. Buy yourself something nice, treat yourself, try a little retail therapy. People don't seem to realize that this attempt to feel good is exactly what propagates the problem. Compared to people just 50 years ago, modern wage slaves live a life of material abundance. They're consumers. They have big screen TVs, movies on demand, microwave ovens, food processors, and 24-piece flatware. They own multiple pairs of shoes and have enough clothes for more than a week without doing laundry. They have carpeted floors, matching furniture, and vacuum cleaners. They have expensive toys. They have car payments, college degrees, 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom mortgages, laptop computers, cell phone contracts, power tools with 108-piece bit sets, premium cable, air conditioning systems, blenders, food processors, pool tables, DVD players, and granite countertops. They redecorate, attend sporting events, go on vacations, and occasionally play with their toys. Society has made it very easy to spend money. Shopping centers line every street. Many creative means of spending money have been devised. Instead of spending 30 seconds opening a can of tomatoes with a traditional can opener, it's now possible to spend 30 minutes working to pay for an electric can opener that can open the can in the same amount of time. Similarly, many of the ways we used to do things have been redesigned to ensure that instead of doing it ourselves, we can buy some gadget or some service to have it done for us. This is convenient because we're usually too busy working to pay for it to do it ourselves. This is the gist of the service economy. Presumably, if we didn't create enough problems to spend time solving them, the economy would collapse. To speed up consumption, it's possible to obtain loans and spend money that's yet to be earned. All it requires is a promise of increased amounts of work in the future and a commitment of up to 30 years to pay the money back, plus twice the amount in interest. Lots of personal finance gurus are willing to charge you money, some will do it for free, to advise you as to exactly how to distribute your money into retirement plans, college savings plans, mortgages, and credit cards to maximize your lifetime consumption. Success and power are equated with spending money. It usually starts with toys for the children and quickly evolves to cell phones and fashionable clothes. Many realize that demonstrating their personal values through the color and build of their cell phone is perhaps inadequate, and then move on to bigger and more expensive propositions, like cars, redecorating, or kitchen renovating. Not that there's anything wrong with such creative outlets, but the scale of these projects is often mind-boggling, with tens of thousands being spent on marginal increases in functionality. The old but typically fully functioning items are discarded, especially if they have those ugly 1970s earth tone colors or that bland 1980s beige, or whatever we had in the 1990s, and so on. Try for a moment to envision the large pile of abandoned yet functional telephones, TVs, furniture, toys, old clothes, and shoes, LPs, CDs, and packaging material that you have discarded so far in your life. Such stuff doesn't magically disappear. It goes somewhere, typically a landfill. Now multiply that by several 100 million people. Not cool. In the same vein, tally up the sum total of your earned income so far, subtract your savings, and compare the difference to your pile of stuff. Was it really a good deal? Is spending the most productive years of your life chained to the job market to collect a lot of rarely used stuff that gathers dust in the closet or takes up space in junkyards a wise choice? Were you really born just to die, leaving a large pile of discarded consumer goods? Probably not. I realize that not wanting a house full of things makes me look weird and recently even unpatriotic. After all, more is better, and who doesn't want to be better? But perhaps conformity is not the only way to live. In fact, by taking the other end of the bargain, saving as much as other people are spending on wants, it's possible to retire and live on invested savings after just 5 years of full-time work. Rather than increasing the amount of work to acquire more stuff, reducing this superficial need reduces the amount of necessary work. It's possible to reduce the amount of work all the way down to zero. This is financial independence. Indeed, playing the shadow game for 5 years provides a permanent way out of the cave. Alternatively, it's also possible to return to the cave for a few months every year to earn money for the next adventure out of the cave. This is living on the economy, so to speak, rather than living in the economy. The resulting freedom can be spent on personal projects, such as reading books, visiting places, entertaining, exploring, cooking, learning, and experiencing. It can also be used to start businesses, engage in a second career, care for family members, and so on, without worrying about having to support oneself. This book explains how, but it really becomes quite simple once you realize that the option is there. I have done it, and others have too. In my mind, financial independence provides a greater sense of balance to one's life compared to doing just one thing. In addition, it doesn't postpone this balance until traditional retirement age, when people who have been stuck in the same place all their life decide that they need to travel, only to find that they're sick of traveling after a while because they never figured out exactly what makes them happy. The most frequent objection to casting off the chains is that living on something corresponding to every third paycheck, or even every fourth paycheck, between $6,000 to $10,000 a year, as opposed to living paycheck to paycheck, must be a boring life. Not knowing any better, I must admit that I started my own adventure with such assumptions. But back then, the knowledge and the wisdom relevant to such an undertaking wasn't as easy to come by as it is today. I had to discover everything from scratch. I grew up as a consumer and spent my money on increasingly larger toys. I knew a ton about various CPUs and how to match memory and graphics cards to build the ultimate gaming platform. I also had pretty good hand-eye coordination from many hours spent playing computer games. Like most consumers, I was wholly ignorant of ways to attain a high-quality life without spending money. This is why retirement savings goals are frequently in the millions. Those, and they're a majority, who have to pay for every convenience really need that much to replicate a median income lifestyle. As a lifelong consumer used to spending large amounts of money to obtain food, stuff, and entertainment, it's hard to imagine how it's possible to spend practically nothing on furniture, a few dollars on clothing, very little on food, and almost nothing on transport, and generally less on rent or mortgage. However, it's possible to live on a third or even a quarter of the median income, putting one solidly below the government-defined poverty line, without living in austerity or eating grits. There is no reason to pay retail. You can enjoy the fun of beating the system that exists to take your money and live a middle-class lifestyle on a quarter of the usual numbers. But why aim low? Why not live an upper-class lifestyle and think of yourself as a poor aristocrat? It requires a somewhat different approach, though, and it requires some skill. It also requires a reprogramming of the way we've always done it, or rather, the way we usually do it. In fact, a frequent question I get when I talk about frugality is what kind of things, like CFLs or pressure cookers, people should buy to become more frugal. Wrong question, dude. Leaving the cave takes some effort. It would be easy if the framework or mental modes of thinking outside the cave were similar to the shadows. In that case, I'd write a list of 25 ways to save money, 25 ways to earn money, and 25 ways to save time. And you'd just add them to your checklist and squeeze them in during your lunch hour. It's acceptable to use these lists as inspirations, but don't follow them like recipes. You'd be missing the point. To paraphrase Einstein, you can't solve your problems with the same mindset that created them. To live as a free person following lists of easy, repetitive things, possibly in return for some reward, is exactly what should be avoided. Instead, it's necessary to understand how the world works and how people have been specialized to the point of general incompetence, like ants, which only know how to do one job but do it very well. This is not human nature. To live well, one must go beyond lists and start thinking creatively about solving problems. One must accept a lot more personal responsibility than merely showing up on time, following orders, checking off boxes, and trying to fit in. One must learn the general systemic rules that allow one to improvise and really live life the way it was intended. in your own way, rather than following checklists devised by some random guy like me. One must start thinking creatively about how to solve problems. Most of life's challenges can be thought of as problems with solutions. Some problems are self-created. One must learn to avoid these. A common solution to problems is to go and buy some product. Too weak to open a lid? Go buy a tool rather than exercise to become stronger. Want a barbecue but don't have a grill? Go buy one instead of making a fire pit. Perhaps the best advice to overcoming this consumerist tendency to buy is to study alternative sources of information. Ignore most of the personal finance books out there. They only explain how to play the game by the rules. Instead, use the rules to play a different game. Remember that the shadows on the wall are just a part of life. There's no reason to only follow the rules of the shadows. I have been inspired by many different sources. Books on backpacking, observations of animals and ecosystems, boating, cycling, people living in cars, even the homeless. I have read books on systems theory, biology, physics, finance, as well as more practical manuals on plumbing, house wiring, and construction. And then I have adapted these ideas to my own life. To successfully break free of one's chains, one must build an overarching philosophy of what it means to live, which is different from the consumer philosophy of follow advice and orders, work, get paycheck, spend paycheck, get stuff, repeat. Those who merely try to implement small changes like 25 frugal tips to save money to have more money to spend have actions that are entirely misaligned with their goals, and they will fail for exactly the same reasons that most diets fail. What's more, they will have experienced much mental anguish before finally capitulating and declaring, enough of this frugality, or I want to splurge, I deserve it, or I give up, I'll just hire a professional. No one's entire philosophy must change. Later on, I offer a philosophy modeled on the Renaissance ideal of the 17th century and the craftsmen of the 18th century who wrote the Constitution of the United States at the peak of the Age of Enlightenment. This is a framework of complexity where a person is skilled in more than just one area. It is, in a way, a contrarian approach to the contemporary idea of one man, one specialization. It's an interlocking way of arranging one's life. In risk management parlance, one wants to transfer from a tightly coupled linear system of financed consumerism to a loosely coupled, complex system of the financially independent Renaissance man. Naturally, I do not expect everybody to like this philosophy. We typically tend to like philosophies that are already somewhat aligned with our personal values and talents. For example, books like this one, which first tell you that everything about our current society is wrong, and then try to offer an alternative, are mostly a reflection of the author's values rather than an absolute view. We're all different, and it's up to each of us to develop, grow, and walk our unique path. This is what it means to be human. One thing is certain, though. Conspicuous consumption is not a natural state for all of us. This change isn't easy. Not everybody can do it. In a sense, it's like running a marathon or getting into shape. Running a marathon is technically easy, but few have the persistence to actually go through with it. And even fewer are already in such a physical condition so as to do it without preparation. Mental blocks are similar. It's much easier to say that something can't work than it is to find a way to make it work. There are always excuses. I don't want it enough. It'd be nice, but I can't do it, they say. Of course, they can do it. There are no laws of physics that forbid it. There are, thankfully, no laws of society that forbid it either. They just prefer their convenient, predictable, and comfortable misery. So don't expect people to immediately understand when you start casting your chains off. There will also be resistance from well-adjusted people who like to see everybody fit a particular mold and who don't tolerate anyone with different values. They'll tell you that you are unrealistic and irresponsible and maybe speak of duty. If you don't work, you're lazy. If you don't spend, you're unpatriotic. Yet these same people may feel stuck in a life of quiet desperation. Stuck because they've convinced themselves that everything is good as long as others are living the same way. In the best case, people will be slightly amused at what a crackpot you are. Yes, that is interesting and maybe fine for you, but I could never. Even once you're living the good life, they will still not understand, because according to the shadows, what you're doing doesn't make sense. But you don't have a lawn. However, you might be surprised to see that eventually the people around you, your previously doubting friends and family, will start to adopt some of your behavioral patterns. While they will not take the lead, they will follow your example. What Gandhi said, be the change you want to see. may sound trite, but that doesn't make it untrue. It works far better than trying to institute policies. You don't need to wait for change while gathering forces, just change. If enough people do it, it will start a slow revolution from the bottom up. When people have more time as a result of working less because they need less money to satisfy their wants, more things will get done. Because it's the right thing to do. The world will be slightly better off for it. For those who choose to do it, attaining financial independence in a handful of years will provide them the time and freedom, the lack of which has previously prevented them from getting things done and caused relations with friends to stagnate or degenerate into acquaintances or networking opportunities. Financial independence and extreme early retirement are still for the explorers and the pioneers of a new lifestyle. They will be followed by others. Now there are few to follow, but I predict that within a decade or so, there will be many others. More on this later. 1.1. Is this for me? The methods presented in this book don't rely on a combination of risky techniques coupled with once-in-a-lifetime opportunities, such as bull market investment returns or leveraged or correctly timed real estate speculation, all of which are hard to replicate. While such methods are interesting to read about, they fall into the high-risk, high-return personal anecdote category, where only a few people win. Also, typically, when books describing such opportunities finally come out, it's too late to implement their methods, as the market has already peaked. In this book, and in my life, I have chosen to rely on methods that work regardless of external circumstances, as long as your country has a market economy and does not force anyone to work. However, as mentioned earlier, just because the methods are universally applicable, it doesn't mean that everybody will adopt them and follow through. This book is, after all, about leaving Plato's cave and prescribes a lifestyle makeover rather than simple, quick fixes to patch the problems of other lifestyles. To use a sports analogy, this book will teach you how to think and work out like an athlete so that you can become an athlete, rather than present a few easy workouts to lose a few pounds and get into shape before the beach season begins. It might be helpful for listeners to get an idea of whether they're ready to leave the cave. What follows are a few questions which might indicate whether someone is a good fit for the proposed changes. Are you completely happy with your life? This question is important for anyone contemplating change. Anyone who thinks their life perfect is unlikely to want to change anything. However, perhaps you're not completely satisfied with your life. Or maybe the way the world works doesn't quite make sense to you. For instance, why do we still work 8 hours a day, 50 weeks a year, when we're twice as productive as we were 50 years ago? Why do we have children, then send them away for most of the day shortly after they're born? Is there more to life than more work and more stuff? Can happiness be bought? Do you want to live on a solid foundation? Many people get married, start a family, or buy a home without a solid financial foundation, based on savings. Instead, they borrow heavily, hoping to make up the difference later. This can easily turn into a lifetime of struggling to make ends meet because such a large fraction of the income goes towards paying interest on past consumption, when it could instead be used to live better. For example, people could work less and spend more time with each other. A good financial foundation allows parents to raise their own children instead of outsourcing the job to daycare centers and babysitters. A good financial foundation allows people to spend more time working on things they want to work on, instead of working on things they have to work on to pay the bills. In general, financial independence creates much more flexibility and allows a greater choice of how one lives. Do you want to start a business? Being financially independent, you can take risks with your time to focus on projects which don't require an immediate payout to justify your effort. If successful, working for yourself can be more remunerative than working for others because you receive the full benefit of your efforts. The biggest cost of a startup is often the salary you need to pay yourself to live. Not having to pay this out of company funds allows you to invest the money back into the company. In addition, you can focus all your effort on the company instead of working other jobs to support yourself. Do you dream of doing instead of having things? Is your job getting in the way of doing what you want to do? Nobody lives forever, and sooner or later people realize that their lifespan is finite and that someday they're going to die. This revelation occurs retrospectively when people hit their 40s and ponder what they've done with their life so far. It's called a midlife crisis. The question you need to answer is what you want to do with your life given that you don't have the time to do everything. Do you want to spend most of your life paying off the interest of a 30-year mortgage and working so you can fill increasingly bigger houses with increasingly more stuff while being stuck in your daily commute in increasingly nicer cars? Or are you prepared to give up the stuff so that you can do whatever you want, whenever and wherever, within reason? What will your legacy be? What you owned or who you were? Do you believe life is an adventure? The average man leads a predictable, some would say boring, life. He is expected to get a college degree and a career, buy the things that are advertised on TV, get married and have children, and then get a mortgage and a retirement plan. Our culture of conformity doesn't allow much choice. Do you find it difficult to accept this constraint of choice? Do you find it difficult to pursue your passions when you have to hold on to a full-time job to pay all the bills? Does your job zap your creative energies? Many people, particularly young people, are starting to realize that the pursuit of happiness isn't found through the pursuit of accumulating things. They don't drop out. They opt out and forge their own path, starting up internet companies, traveling the world, and retiring early from the rat race so they can spend their lives living rather than just buying stuff. Which do you prefer? Do you want to make a difference? The system, which many of us like to blame our problems on and yet count on for our solutions, is not really governed by a mysterious group referred to as them. The world that we live in is the aggregate sum of the individual behavior of all of us. They are not responsible for our world. We are. You are. Unless you are a dictator, a rock star, or another person with enough influence to facilitate a top-down approach with decrees or manifestos, the most effective change starts with individuals using a bottom-up approach. You have to become the change you want to see. You have to set an example for other people to follow. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Unfortunately, many people in our culture are part of the problem. We're concerned about our dependence on oil imports and the resulting wars, yet we drive 30 miles to work every day to pay the bills. We're very much locked into an economic and behavioral model that conflicts with our values. What other choice do we have? Well, keep listening. Society offers you a deal. Get a student loan, get a college degree, get a mortgage, and become a homeowner. Build your life with a deck of credit cards. Just sign on the dotted line, and before you know it, you're on the hook for a house, a car, the basic human needs of cable TV, fancy restaurant visits, cell phone and gym subscriptions, and a house full of toys. After a few years, it'll be hard to imagine life without all that stuff. You will, therefore, spend all your life working in a possibly unfulfilling job to pay the bills for all the things you signed up for. If your job brings you down, you buy something on credit as a reward, dragging you further into the spiral of addiction. You'll be living in a virtual debtor's prison, except you'll only see the bars if you miss a payment. If you have debt, you're not a free person. You're explicitly owned by your debt and implicitly owned by the creditor. You put 15% of your income into a retirement account for 40 years, plan to retire at 65. Then try to spend the remainder of your life making up for lost time and health. Are you willing to take that deal? If not, there's another way. Don't accept the chains. Leave the cave. Changing your frame of mind is key to escaping. But change is a challenge. This challenge can become a struggle if your frame of mind is incompatible with your adopted lifestyle. In other words, you need to believe in your lifestyle as an end rather than as a means to an end. To wit, runners and other athletes sometimes get the reverse cum hoc ergo propter hoc comment that they're already fit, so they don't need to exercise. Yet their diligent exercising is exactly what causes their fitness. How is doing good, creating wealth, establishing connections, in short, accomplishing anything, any different? Accomplishing something is more effective with a theory that is compatible with your reality. Such a theory must, like all theories, be built on principles that have been developed from understanding the patterns in observed facts. Here, I seek to produce a map rather than a set of directions. Directions are succinct and useful until you get lost or need to change your plans. Maps allow for optimization and the freedom to choose your destination, but they require navigational skills. To navigate a map, you must first understand your present environment objectively. That is, your reality must match the reality. It would not be an exaggeration to say that anyone who has been brought up in our modern way of life knows very little about their environment. Except a few particular details, they need to operate some machine in a job, push papers around a bureaucracy, or manage those who do so. A broad view of the world is therefore described in Chapter 2. You must then understand how your environment, your present position, and your destination relate to the map. You must understand how your environment affects your choices as well as your motivation for choosing. This is described in Chapter 3. To get somewhere, you must have a deliberate purpose in mind and a vision of the destination that drives your actions. This vision is described in Chapter 4. To make deliberate choices, you must know how to creatively deal with your environment. Strategic choices relate present actions to future actions. A set of general strategies or guiding principles for maximizing utility and efficiency according to your values is given in Chapter 5. Individual examples of tactics are given in Chapter 6. Since everybody's situation and goals are unique, these are intended more as examples that illustrate the principles of the previous chapters than as actionable to-do lists. Chapter 7 discusses financial independence and extreme early retirement. There is tremendous confusion as to what extreme early retirement means, most likely because only a minority of extreme early retirees choose to replicate the lifestyle, usually an endless vacation, of those who defer their retirement to old age. This book gives you the tools and shows you how to use them. However, it can't give you experience in using them, nor can it give you the courage to do it. That is up to you. 1.2. Barriers to change. To change, many barriers must be overcome. Having previously overcome barriers, overcoming new barriers becomes much easier. You may want to cross-train for a new lifestyle by first completing a marathon, a PhD, or something equally arduous, like building a house of cards. The decision to overcome barriers can also follow from shocking events. For instance, many decide to become healthy after they, or someone close to them, experiences their first heart attack, or something equally serious. Similar epiphanies occur after temporary job losses during an economic crisis. Barriers include not knowing about an activity or its benefits, the belief that the activity is difficult to engage in, social disapproval, or the belief that there are more benefits in continuing the present behavior. People will naturally choose activities that they believe to have high benefits and low barriers to entry, the quick and easy way to riches. Benefits and barriers vary significantly between people. To some, walking half a mile is fun, or at least as natural as putting on a pair of pants, whereas to others it represents a significant labor to be avoided. Some have the same aversion to merely getting up from the couch. Most importantly, the proposed behavior may compete with one or more other behaviors, where doing the proposed activity excludes another activity or is simply believed to exclude another activity. It'll often be the case that activities associated with the highest benefit, such as moving into a smaller home or giving up personal car ownership, also have the highest perceived barriers. In addition, choosing these activities means rejecting other activities, such as driving out to get a bottle of shampoo because you forgot to buy it earlier this morning and simply need it for tomorrow morning. Living in a small home means rejecting the pleasure of filling up rooms with stuff from the mall. Not surprisingly, the most common reaction I get is, "This sounds a bit extreme," or "This may be fine for you, but I prefer something that is more akin to what I'm currently doing." Hence, to convince you of something, I either have to convince you of the benefits of the proposed behavior, the surmountability of the barriers to the proposed behavior, the marginal benefits of the competing behavior, or the foolhardiness of the barriers to the competing behavior. Many people associate their ideas and thoughts with who they are as a person. This is a significant barrier, since admitting that an alternative is better is perceived as a personal failure. Barriers are therefore raised to protect the ego and avoid a change of perceptions. This is done by adopting one of the counter-strategies to the aforementioned list. The most common counter-arguments are that the barriers to the proposed behavior are too high. I can't give up my car. The second most common counter-arguments are that the benefits of the proposed behavior are too low. I don't know what I'd do if I didn't have to go to work all day every day. The third most common is that the barriers to the competing behavior are low enough. I'm already doing it this way. I got too much invested already. The fourth most common is that the benefits of the competing behavior are sufficiently high. Although I'm miserable, at least I'm comfortable. This varies depending on who you are. Barriers represent a cost which must be paid. The willingness to pay depends on a combination of 1. Dissatisfaction with the present situation, 2. Vision of the future situation, and 3. The practicality of changing from the present situation to the future situation. This will to change can be represented by the volume of a triangular pyramid, with each of these factors as one of its 3 dimensions. Intuitively speaking, if either dissatisfaction, vision, or practical first steps are lacking, it's unlikely that action will be taken. Specifically, if dissatisfaction is low, obviously no change is going to happen. Why change strategy if you're satisfied with the way things are? If vision is low, this can lead to a situation of comfortable misery, where the vision isn't strong enough or too scary to allow change. A high level of dissatisfaction can be accompanied by low vision in cases of depression, loss of faith or vision, or by external circumstances. For example, the mistake many make when becoming frugal is that they don't replace their previous vision of accumulating more stuff with an equally strong vision of doing something else. Giving up the current vision thus results in feelings of deprivation and is, in a sense, a loss of faith and even identity. If, however, you follow a different faith than the church of shopping, then not partaking in the shopping ritual won't be a deprivation. Dissatisfaction with the current situation may be high, and the vision of an alternative may be high as well. But without a plan, this can only lead to frustration. There must be a strategy, or at least a plan, and it must be practical. To get things done, it's much better to have a plan than to have passion, at least insofar as you act on it. Finally, there's the issue of perceived cost. If the cost is too high, change is not going to happen. Change-mongers thus have the following 4 variables to play with. 1. Increase your dissatisfaction with the present situation. 2. Strengthen your vision of the future situation. 3. Build a plan to get from the present to the future. 4. Lower the perceived cost of the plan. Motivation depends on the individual, too. For instance, I'm motivated by avoiding negative outcomes, such as feeling bad. Others are motivated by striving for positive outcomes, such as feeling good. I prefer to change instantly and radically. Others prefer to change slowly. I have written many of the suggestions in the following chapters in the spirit of changing away from something negative immediately. If you feel differently about change, modify my approach to suit your personality accordingly.